boxcar takes forever. Another stop here and wherever all these other people go. There's a good time playing in the city. Something here within me just can't wait to get on home. When you're on my mind and I'm on the road, I know I'll never be alone. You are the reason why I'm coming back around. You make me want to settle down. Hotel windows, living from a suitcase. Like the folks in this place, I sure do miss the ones back home. Miles of highways, or something more familiar. I don't remember what the words were, but they always bring me home. When you're on my mind and I'm on the road, I know I'll never be alone. You are the reason why I'm coming back around. You make me want to settle down. Oh, just another 100 miles until the borderline. We got all this time. Oh, just another few more hours until the day. When you're on my mind and I'm on the road, I know I'll never be alone. You are the reason why I'm coming back around. You make me want to settle down. You are the reason why I'm coming back around. You make me want to settle down.
Thank you. Thank you, Seth. This is singer-songwriter Seth Adam. And if you haven't heard him before, you should.
Thank you.
Seth brings us some great songs with really honest lyrics. He's working on his own brand of American rock and roll, and I'm a big fan. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Dinner Stories and the Reimagined 2020 International Festival of Arts and Ideas. This is our 25th year. We're doing a little bit differently this year, celebrating virtually, and I'm so glad you're with us. You can go to artidea.org to find out about our Ideas program, our food events, our virtual bike and walking tours, artistic experiences, the NEA Big Read, and Arts on Call. And if you haven't heard about that, it's a pretty cool program, which gives you the chance to book an artist for a 15-minute performance outside the location of your choice, all nicely social distant, but it's a very good way to help support artists. So welcome to Dinner Stories, New Haven. Why I came, why I stayed. I've asked myself this before. But our first teller will give you a reason why she came and stayed. Elisabeth Anton on becoming a Yalie is our appetizer for tonight. She recently started working with the Institute Library Story Share group for about a year or so, and she studied with Donald Davis. Please welcome Elisabeth Anton.
It's September 1981, and my mother's helping me move into my freshman dorm at Yale. The air is crackling with the energy of 1,000 freshmen descending upon the old campus. I don't know who's more excited, my mother or me. We find Vanderbilt Hall and lug my suitcases up 3 flights of steps. My mother stops to admire these quaint wooden cubby holes in the entryway. Turns out there are mailboxes. When we find my room, we gasp. There's a living room with 2 bedrooms off of it. There are wooden floors and oak-paneled walls. There's a bay window with lead-paned glass and a fireplace, a real fireplace with a marble mantel. We've never seen anything like it. When we finish unpacking, my mother gives me a tearful, lingering hug. "Ay, mamita," she says to me, "studying to be a doctor is going to be hard, but I know you can do it." You see, I've wanted to be a doctor ever since I was a little girl, but I wriggle out of her grasp, impatient to shoo her off campus. I mean, I've got to get on with the business of becoming a Yalie. 3 days later, I am lugging my biology textbook up those 3 flights of steps when I notice there's a note in my mailbox. It's from my dean. "There's been an emergency," it reads. "Please come see me immediately." Well, I don't know my dean and I don't know where her office is, but when I find her, she sits me down and she says, "Your mother collapsed today. She's in the hospital. You must go." She gives me the $28 for a round-trip bus ticket to Springfield, Massachusetts, where we've just moved up from Puerto Rico. She puts me on the bus, and 5 hours later, I am standing next to my mother at her bedside in the ICU. She's got tubes in her nose and needles in her arms and wires attached to her chest, and she looks so small and so pale. And I wonder, had she looked this fragile 3 days ago and I just didn't notice? My mother is diagnosed with leukemia and given 8 months to live, maybe a year. I spend that year commuting. On Friday afternoons, I leave Yale and go to Springfield, where I spend the weekend shuttling between the hospital and home, where I have 2 younger brothers living alone. On Sundays, I go back to Yale, where Monday mornings I wake up to find, almost always, a pink slip in my mailbox. That pink slip means that I've been put on bursar hold. Bursar hold is what happens to those of us whose parents haven't paid the tuition bill on time. What it means is that we can't eat in the dining hall and we can't buy books at the co-op on credit. Now, to get off bursar hold, you have to go stand in a line that snakes around the block until you can get into the financial aid office, where you need to promise that the check is in the mail. Only then will they take you off bursar hold. Until the next time. Well, somehow I make it to the end of the year, and my mother is still alive. I decide to take a 1-year leave of absence, and I move to Springfield and get a job at the local pharmacy. And then I get on with the business of making sure that my younger brother, who's 11 years old, stops cutting school and doing drugs on the streets. 4 years later, my mother dies. Returning to Yale is complicated. Yale automatically withdraws anyone who has taken more than 1 year off, so I have to reapply. When I'm interviewed by my new dean, he asks, "Well, Miss Anton, what do you think has changed that might make you successful this time around?" Well, I don't remember what I said to him, but quite frankly, there's nothing that hasn't changed. Number 1, gone is the illusion that I'm ever really going to fit in at Yale. I mean, there just doesn't seem to be a whole lot of room in that cloistered culture of privilege for an experience as radically different as mine. Number 2, gone is my dream of becoming a doctor. These 5 years in the oncology ward still haunt me to this day. And number 3, gone is the willingness to let Yale ever put me on bursar hold again. My solution? I move as far off campus as I possibly can. So this is what my days at Yale look like. I drive 15 minutes onto campus and park in front of the Yankee Doodle. I feed the meter, have breakfast, and run to my first class. I then run back to feed the meter before my second class, to which I'm always late. For lunch, I have a slice of pizza at Yorkside and then run back to the meter before my third class. In the afternoons, I wash dishes in one of the dining halls as part of my work-study financial aid package. If I have managed to not get a ticket, I drive home feeling really very pleased with myself. I'm pretty sure that I still owe the city of New Haven thousands of dollars in delinquent parking tickets. At the end of my day, I'm exhausted, and I curl up in bed and fall asleep with my books. Somehow, I make it through 3 years, and graduation day finally arrives. I sit on old campus, drowning in a sea of black, flat caps, searching in vain for a familiar face. My name is called, and I step onto the stage where my dean is waiting to hand me my diploma. "Well, Miss Anton," he says, "I must admit, I wasn't sure I'd ever see you here." Stunned, I let go of his hand and I step back. He must have said something like congratulations, but I didn't hear it. I turned on my heel and strode off that stage and vowed never, ever to step foot on this campus again. 8 days later, I'm on a plane to Paris. Now, I'm not moving to France on a whim. No, this is a very well thought out plan. You see, I've just spent the better part of 8 years feeling like an imposter, feeling like somehow I'm just not good enough to be a real Yalie, and I'm determined to fix that. How? Well, I'm going to become sophisticated. And how do you do that? Well, everybody knows that to be sophisticated, you need to speak French and drink French wine and ski in the French Alps and watch French films, and voila. When I step off that plane, I leave that very unhappy Yalie buckled in her plane seat, and I proceed to live and work in Europe for 20 years. I think it takes me a very long time to become sophisticated. Well, when I'm ready to come back to the US, I write a proposal for a book about the history of women at Yale. The president's wife thinks it's a fabulous idea. The hitch? The research needs to be done in the archives, on campus. Okay, so I devise another plan. I'm going to rent a room near campus for 6 months. I will spend day and night in the archives researching, and when I'm done, I will hightail it to wherever to write the book. Well, you know what they say about best laid plans. 3 weeks after I arrive in New Haven, I get an email. It reads, "If you are the first generation in your family to attend university and or come from a low-income background, you are invited to the inaugural conference of the first-gen low-income Yale alumni." My mouth goes dry. How did they find out? I mean, I'd left that Yalie behind years ago. I delete that email. I am so not going. But then I do. And I sit through that conference, scarcely able to believe what I'm hearing. Story after story of people just like me, alums who suffer from imposter syndrome, who felt alienated and inadequate and like second-class citizens at Yale. These are my peeps. And it turns out we were always here. We just didn't have each other. Well, I do not open my mouth throughout that entire conference, because I know that if I do, I'm going to start to cry. And if I cry, I'm not going to be able to stop. I mean, it isn't until that moment that I realize how deep the wounds are, how much healing I need. Well, I'm involved with this group today, this amazing group of people, where I've made friends with alums who really get me. I mentor undergrads who invite me to lunch on campus, which means I finally get to eat in the dining halls. I work with the coat drive because I'll be damned if another undergrad has to go through a winter without a coat like I did. I've been involved with this group for 2 years. I've been living in New Haven for 2 years. I've made friends, I've found my storytelling community, and I've created a home. My work with First Gen is helping me heal my relationship to Yale. Little by little, I'm learning to give without fear. I'm learning to share parts of myself that I had abandoned so long ago. And each time I do, what I get back is a little piece of my inner Yalie becoming whole and making me whole. Thank you.
Elisabeth, that was wonderful. And I'm glad you came back to New Haven, because then I get to hear all your great stories. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, and now we're ready for another song from Seth Adam.
They say it's hard when you're fixing a life, trying to pick the broken pieces up time after time, and every day is spent looking for some purity line. Oh yeah, it's hard trying to make it all work with a crash that's hanging overhead, and it's gonna hurt. Get some unsolicited advice from some kind of jerk. You don't know the trouble I've been in. You don't know the trouble I've been in. Hanging in the distance, but I'll take it for the win. You don't know the trouble I've been in. Sometimes it's hard trying to leave it behind, when habitual consensus keeps me running the light. I'll take it to a future place on a carousel ride. Oh yeah, it's hard trying to make it alone, when I think I know better than the sorrow I own. I'm just a harbinger considering the struggles I know. You don't know the trouble I've been in. You don't know the trouble I've been in. Hanging in the distance, but I'll take it for the win. You don't know the trouble I've been in. Make it alone, I'll make it alive. Everybody's got their sacrifice, and I'm trying to make it through mine. You don't know the trouble I've been in. You don't know the trouble I've been in. Hanging in the distance, but I'll take it for the win. You don't know the trouble I've been in. You don't know the trouble I've been in. You don't know trouble I've been in.
That was awesome. Thanks, Seth. Tell me more about that song.
It was kind of apropos of Elisabeth's story. Just when somebody kind of passes judgment on you and they have no idea what you're going through. There's actually more to the story than that. Some guy called me a jerk one day when I was walking my dog, but that's a whole other story. I'm not doing the storytelling tonight. But
well, we'll bring you back one of these days to hear it, okay? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Up next is our main chorus with Wendy Dalton Marans. I've known Wendy for several years now. She's also part of the Institute Library Story Share. She's also part of Songs and Stories, a member of the Story City Troupe and Storytellers New Haven. She says that she did a New York City Moth Slam and lived to tell more stories. Please welcome Wendy with Elephants and Gems.
Thanks. In 1984, in the spring, I got married twice in a week and a half to the same guy. So the decision, we were getting married the first time in a small, dingy registry office on the Euston Road in London. And a week later, we got married in his parents' backyard in Bethesda, Maryland, under a chuppah with a cantor who said he would marry us even though I wasn't converting. The big decision about whether to move and be in England or America was actually easy. I had decided long before that I was leaving England. But now we had a more critical choice to make. I had been offered an interview in Manhattan with a woman whose work I had been following for a while and who I was very interested in meeting. And he had been offered an interview at Yale Child Study Center. And even coming from England, I knew that this was not an institution to be sneered at. So on May the 12th, we got married in London and had a lovely reception under a big magnolia tree with azaleas in full bloom. And then the following day, we flew to Manhattan. I was going to stay with my newly minted brother-in-law, and my husband went up to New Haven, where I would follow him after my interview. The interview was terrific. Dr. Jansky was warm, engaging, interested in the work, funny, and she invited me to join her practice on the spot. And I left the office elated. I meandered my way through Manhattan, watching people, soaking up the vicarious energy, feeling excited, eavesdropping into conversations that sounded like movie sound bites. And then I arrived at Grand Central and just stood in awe. It was the first time I had been there. I had to run to catch the train to New Haven. And as the scene flashed by on the train, I saw other names that conjured up movies, Harlem and Pelham. As the miles ticked by, the murals and high-rises were replaced by drab buildings, lots of graffiti and broken windows. And my mood shifted gears. It dawned on me that the dilemma that we faced might be quite a hard one to figure out. But by the time I got to New Haven, I decided he'd get the job here and I could commute to New York. Problem solved. I got off the train onto the platform and followed the handful of weary-looking passengers down this subterranean-like tunnel with a tarp hanging overhead and water dripping from it. It was like the set from an alien movie. And I felt my mood shift gears again. I thought, so this is New Haven? I came out to get a cab. Now, bearing in mind, I came from London, where the black cabs are driven by mostly men who have spent 2 years learning every street, every shortcut, every building, all of the history. They are holders of the knowledge. They're brilliant. Even today, if you're in a traffic jam, they will do much better than any Uber driver with a GPS system. And I just thought, New Haven's a small place, not so many streets, probably the same kind of situation here. But no, I get to this shack, first of all, which is where the station is because the real station's being refurbished. And then this short, stocky man screams at me and says, "Get in the cab, get in the cab." So I do as I'm told. And then he continues to shovel other people into the cab behind me so that there are 5 adults crammed into his tiny car. And before I can get out of the door, he screeches off and says, "Where are you going?" And of course, none of us are going to the same place. And then he says, "If you look out of the left-hand window, you'll see the elephants in a minute." And I think I have got in the car with a raving lunatic. And then I see elephants. This doesn't thrill me. One of the passengers says, "Don't worry, it's the Barnum and Bailey circus, and they're walking the elephants to the Colosseum." And again, all I can think is, where am I? I'm dropped last at Yale Child Study Center. And I walk in, and this dragon of a woman named Natalie tells me fiercely to sit down and wait. She's obviously had a heads up that I would be arriving. So I sit obediently and notice children in the waiting room who look as though they might be related to the cab driver. And then I'm rescued by my husband, who introduces me to the director. He's obviously been primed as to what I've been spending my day doing, and he asks me how things have gone. I bubble over with enthusiasm. I say, it was so exciting, and I've realized it would be very easy to commute. He looked at me and he said, "Oh, no, that won't work." And I bit my tongue and thought, where do you get off telling me what to do? The following morning, we head off to Bethesda. The week is a whirlwind of last-minute meetings with photographers and florists and the cantor. But in between times, we are having these quiet, intense discussions about what we're going to do. After about 3 days, I realized begrudgingly that actually starting a life in a new country and trying to do that while I'm commuting back and forth isn't going to make it an easy way to connect. We both want to have children and can't quite imagine how we would manage that in a city as expensive as New York. And the reality is, I will almost certainly be able to get a job somewhere in Connecticut. But to replicate the Yale opportunity in New York, not so easy. So I make the call and I find a place to sob quietly for about half an hour. And then I pull myself together and move on. I mean, life is full of compromises. The wedding in Bethesda is lovely. It's with friends here under a magnolia tree with azaleas in full bloom. And then we head home to London to wind things up over the next 3 months. Someone in New Haven helps us to find an apartment. So in September the 22nd, I arrive at 11 o'clock at night on the doorstep of an apartment on Orange Street, where my husband is already. He had come ahead by 2 days, 2 weeks. It's beautiful. It has high ceilings, big windows that let in lots of light, hardwood floors, and massive pocket doors. It's on the ground floor, and we even have a porch. I feel quintessentially American. And it has Henry Berliner, the owner of the Foundry bookstore, and his wife Mickey, who live upstairs and prove to be the best neighbors in the world and become like family to us. But being in New Haven isn't easy. It's small. It's not London. It certainly isn't New York. And I miss home. I do love the fact that I'm in a city where I can get to the sea, to the sound, and to mountains and great hikes very easily, all within a stone's throw. I am thrilled to discover buffalo wings at Archie Moore's, which is our neighborhood bar. And then I land a job at Yale Child Study Center, where I learn that Natalie the dragon actually has a heart of gold, and come to understand so much better the children who are in the waiting room. I have great colleagues. I make friends. We have children. We buy our first house. And about 10 years after arriving on a trip, usually an annual trip, to London, as we set off to come here again, I realize for the first time I feel as if I'm coming home, not just leaving home. Our family life's here. And even when we move to Woodbridge for a while, I keep one foot in the door of New Haven. I keep my office. But life is busy with work, with school events, with chauffeuring, with college applications, empty nesting, and then a divorce. And once again, I'm faced with a complicated choice. I rent an apartment in New Haven, 2 minutes away from my first apartment in Mickey and Henry's house. This time, it's on the second floor. It has high ceilings and big windows that let in lots of light, hardwood floors, and massive pocket doors. It even has a tiny screen porch that I can look down on Lawrence Street from. This time, it's a choice, not a compromise. This time, my decision is based on what I see when I look harder at the community that's being built by remarkable people, at the friendships that I've forged over years of shared experiences, at the chances I have to sing and dance and play that I hadn't realized were there before. My life is here. This time, New Haven went from being a home to being the place I belong. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I love that story. It's just wonderful. Thank you so much, Wendy.
Thanks, Denise.
Okay, we're going to have another song from Seth Adam. And do you want to tell us about this one, Seth?
This one really has nothing to do. I'll turn this reverb off. This one doesn't really have much to do with New Haven, but I wanted to play it because I think it's an important message, and that is when the story was exposed about the children at the border in the United States being held captive. I saw a lot of horrible commentary from people on social media, and I just had this immediate thought to myself, like, my God, man, where is your heart? You know, these are children. And so I wrote a song about where's your heart, and this is it. Silhouettes of stamps, carving captions on the wall. Counterfeit courage makes the message look so tall. In your armchair you can look away from the dreadful things you say. Oh, my God, man, where is your heart? Oh my God, man, where is your heart? Shambles and shadows, children tried it for their skin. Empty empathy, passive prayers from fake Christians. Vitriolic words full of disdain. How can you be so inhumane? Oh my God, man, where is your heart? Oh my God, man, where is your heart? Oh my God, man, where is your heart? Have you no compassion in any of your reaction? Brother, what's done you so wrong? Have you no compassion in any of your reactions? Brother, what's done you so wrong? Oh my God, man, where is your heart? Oh my God, man, where is your heart? My God, man, where is your heart? My God, man, where is your heart?
I'm clapping for all of us. That was a beautiful song. Thank you so much. Okay, we're moving on to dessert now. And we have Denise Page, who's a writer, speaker, and a retreat facilitator. I love this. She is the vision engineer for FUN, Fired Up, a network for women aging with zest. Love that idea. You are in for an elegant, sweet story by Denise called Coming Home.
Where do you live? It's amazing that such a simple question would send me in a tizzy for so many years of my life. Where do you live? I could feel myself moving into an almost catatonic state. Where do you live? I could feel my eyes rolling around like the broken hands of a clock in a yesteryear cartoon. You see, the dilemma was, for many years of my life, I didn't live in New Haven, but I was a New Havener. All that I valued, my family legacy and ancestry, all that I had become was so connected to New Haven, I felt disingenuous if I said that I was from somewhere other, if I said I was where I was really from. But one day it occurred to me, I'm from Greater New Haven, I responded. That covered it. Greater New Haven, that's where I had grown up, where I had raised my children, and where I had come back to. You see, we were a New Haven family. No matter where my family members had lived or gone to school or settled down or bought property, we were New Haveners. More than that, we were old New Haveners. My mother's family, the Mannings, had been here for years. When I was doing some research for the family, I discovered in the 1880 census that my great grandfather had been a homeowner on Ashman Street in the 1880s. Now, I had known that my grandfather had owned the home that my mother was born in the 1920s, but the fact that my great grandfather had owned a home here in the 1880s was quite a shock. But in truth, I didn't need the census to let me know that the Mannings were an old New Haven family because all the old New Haveners said so every chance they got. Whenever they saw me, and to anybody who would listen, they'd say, "You're an old New Havener, you know. You know who she is? That's Edwin Manning's granddaughter." Well, I can tell you that meant absolutely nothing to me. I didn't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing. To me, it was actually like nothing. But what I did know was that living in New Haven was a really good thing. For the first few years of my life, we lived on Admiral Street. Admiral Street is a one-block street right off of Dixwell Avenue. And on Admiral Street, we had a big backyard with a beautiful garden and a great big pear tree that provided plenty of shade. My play cousin, Sherry, and I had gotten really skilled at avoiding the squashed pears that had fallen to the ground rotten as we played in the sprinkler that my father had hooked up to the hose in the sweltering summer days. But the best part of that backyard was that it was adjacent to Winchester School, where my big brother went to school. And when school was in session during recess, he would climb up the little slope to our backyard fence with some friends of his just to say hello to me. Oh, it made me feel so grown up. And I got to know them so well, they actually invited me to their fourth grade promotion party. My mother made me the most spectacular girly dress for that party. And then with crinolines rustling, she walked me to the school, right up to the front door and down the hall, just like I was a student there. And I hadn't even started kindergarten yet. Winchester School was also where my father's best friend, Charles Twyman, was assistant principal. And Uncle Charlie didn't just work in our neighborhood. He and Aunt Evelyn lived in our neighborhood, right around the corner on Dixwell Avenue. They lived on the second floor of the house, above the dentist who had his practice beneath them, and their apartment had a beautiful bay window. In that bay window, Aunt Evelyn's cherished glass menagerie was on display, and she would let me play with them. A few doors down from Uncle Charlie and Aunt Evelyn's house was my mother's design studio, D.K.'s Designs. D for Dorothy, K for Keys. All the best dressed women at the Elks Ball were wearing designs made by my mom. A few blocks further down from her, still on Dixwell, my aunt and uncle, Sarah and Mac, had their business, the Keys Funeral Home. I felt so loved and protected in that neighborhood, the neighborhood where everyone knew my name and greeted me enthusiastically. They were genuinely glad to see kids from the neighborhood. And then I didn't know it then, but my dad was alderman of that ward. What I did know is everywhere we went, we were treated like royalty. When the family wanted a beets, that's pizza, it didn't matter whether we were at Sally's or Pepe's. As soon as the owner knew that my dad was there, a waitress would come over, and no matter who was in line in front of us, she would take our order and then usher us to the first available table. When we went to Jimmy's at Sapin Rock, Tony, the owner who would be behind the griddle, flipping the hot dogs on the giant grill with a giant spatula, when he'd look up and see my 6-foot-something dad in line, a staff person would appear beside us with a tray laden with hot dogs with the works, French fries, and even shrimp. 4th of July, we'd drive to the site of the fireworks, We'd drive up to the barricade and my dad would roll down his window. The policeman would peer in and say, "Oh, Mr. Keys," put something in the windshield, and then magically all the barricades would roll away and we'd ride right up to the front to the fence where it said reserved, prime seating. It was great living in New Haven. We moved from Admiral Street to Kensington Street. Back then, Kensington Street was a beautiful tree-lined street whose boughs met in the middle of the street. It's in the street that kids with the names of Swineman and Goldwater and Durso and Metropolis and Keys and Gordon played kick the can and 1, 2, 3 red light until dusk. One day, a couple moved in the apartment across the street from us. They were grad students at Yale, and they were French, from France. I was enchanted. Mrs. Simone, the wife, decided that she would teach some of the neighborhood kids French during our school lunch hour. Can you imagine speaking French as a fourth grader? I tell you, New Haven is a great place to live. We also, around this time, I started getting more privileges, and my joys and wonders of New Haven expanded with those expanded privileges. And I discovered that New Haven was home to the tallest building in the world. My cousin and I could see it from everywhere in New Haven that we went, and we vowed that one day we would touch that building as soon as we could figure out where it was. And then the day arrived. We had located it. And we rode our bikes outside of our boundaries, and we rode right up to it and touched Payne Whitney Gym. We couldn't wait to brag to our classmates. Another discovery I made about New Haven was that not only was it home to the tallest building in the world, but it was also the home of the largest park in the world. I found this out when I was lucky enough to take ice skating lessons at this park at their pavilion. I'd ride my bike there a few days a week in the wintertime for ice skating lessons, and on other days, I would ride down Chapel Street. I'd stop at Papa's open air market and choose a plum or a peach or a pear to accompany me on my journey, and then right to Edgewood Park where I would feed the ducks and then go for a ride on the swings. On my way to the swings, I sometimes got lost because the park was so enormous. But when I got there and sat on the swings, I would imagine that Edgewood Park was my estate. Now, there were other people there, but that was okay because being community minded and having generosity of spirit, I was glad that they came to enjoy my estate property. We also had the opportunity to go downtown. We could walk downtown by ourselves. My mother had offered a challenge. You know, I read every book in the New Haven Public Library children's section by the time I was 10 years old, she had told me. Well, if she had done that, I, of course, had to do the same thing. And so once a week, I would set off down to the downtown library. I would take a shortcut through Ware Hall. I think that was behind Yale Art Gallery. It's been closed off for many decades now, but that was the most mysterious part of my trip. When I got to the library, of course, the librarian knew me, and they knew my family because we were New Haveners. And she would allow me to take out more books than the 4 that were allowed for kids. Oh, New Haven was a wonderful place to live. On some Sundays, Uncle Gene would come and take us to Legion Avenue to the Jewish store. There he would buy us an ice cream cone after minutes of deliberating what flavor we wanted, and he'd get a set of paper dolls for each of us. On the days that we didn't travel out of our neighborhood for a treat, we would go to Volpe's on Chapel Street and sit at the soda fountain where they would make vanilla soda right in front of us. And then my trip would be complete after I purchased the latest release of Millie the Model comic books. I attended Dwight School. It was the same school my dad had attended. It's the school where I learned that JFK was assassinated. It was torn down that same year. It was built, my dad said, when Abraham Lincoln was president 100 years ago. Well, shortly after that, the first betrayal happened. We moved to the suburbs. My parents were frank about it. They didn't want to leave New Haven. They said to buy a house that size with that much land in New Haven was just out of their budget. And so to the suburbs we went. In an instant, my sense of community and belonging disappeared. Now, this community, this new town was not unfamiliar to me. Ironically, it's the same town that my best friend and my mother's best friend both lived in, though they weren't related to one another. So there were many, many, many things that I loved about that town, but it wasn't the town of my ancestors. It wasn't the town where my mother and grandfather had gone to college and my great grandfather, against all odds, had become a homeowner. It wasn't the town where my dad and his family had become leading business people and politicians and activists. I did manage to stay connected to New Haven, and I eagerly awaited the day that I could drive so that I could go to New Haven more often. And I vowed that one day I would move back to New Haven. Well, when I was engaged, my fiance and I had a conversation about where we would live, and he agreed that we would raise our children in New Haven. And so we moved back to New Haven. We moved to East Rock, where my kids had wonderful opportunities, and their childhood experiences weren't the same as mine, but they offered them the same sense of security, the same kinds of opportunities, and the same sense of belongingness. We loved living in New Haven. We're New Haveners. Well, the second betrayal happened. My baby brother, 10 years my junior, got married and bought a home in Bloomfield. Bloomfield? That's not New Haven County. We're New Haveners. Who told you you could move to Bloomfield? I dismissed his decision as being totally irreverent or ignorant of our family legacy. We were New Haveners, and here we had to stay in New Haven County at the very least. I couldn't believe my parents had allowed him to move. Not many years before that, my husband and I had approached them and told them we were considering leaving New Haven, relocating. Well, the cold stares and the silent tongue lashing we got had us quickly retreat from that thought. What blasphemy had we been thinking? We never broached that subject again. We continued living in New Haven and loving raising our family there. Like our families before us, we thrust ourselves into the community. We were active in the parent-teacher organizations. We served on boards. We were on the mayor's task force. I co-hosted a radio show on cultural affairs on WYBC. We really loved this community. And my children got to benefit from all the good things New Haven had to offer. I couldn't get them to pick up the library challenge, but they did enjoy many a day at the Peabody Museum and afternoons with Ranger Dan in East Rock Park. Well, time went on and we continued to thrive in New Haven. We gave to New Haven and we got back from New Haven. New Haven had so much to offer. I decided to get my millinery certificate at FIT, and when I graduated, I opened a studio on State Street. On the day of my grand opening, my mother stood in my shop and wistfully looking at the exposed brick walls, she said, "This reminds me so much of your grandfather's art studio. It was right down the street, a couple of blocks, right here on State Street." We were New Haveners. We loved New Haven. Well, my father died. My children graduated from New Haven Public Schools and went on their ways to seek their own fortunes and futures. Of course, not for good. They would come back to New Haven, I'm sure. And my mom stayed in the family home for many years. And then the ultimate betrayal. I'm moving to Farmington, she tells me. Moving to Farmington? Wait a minute, you can't move to Farmington. You're a Manning. You're a New Havener. You're old New Haven. You're the matriarch. What do you mean? What? We can leave? I never knew we could leave New Haven. Now I know as you hear me say that, that sounds silly. It sounds provincial. And it sounds a little bizarre. But you have to understand, once we had that stalled conversation with my parents about relocating, we never gave it serious thought again. We were New Haveners. After my divorce, I had briefly considered moving to Washington, D.C., but that thought never really took hold because we were New Haveners. I knew we couldn't leave, and now my mom was. And you know what? It freed me. After she left, I decided I was leaving too, and I went all the way to southeastern Connecticut. It wasn't far, but it was so freeing. Nobody knew my name. Nobody knew anything about my family or its legacy. Nobody had any expectations of standards, and I had no burning desire to throw myself in and serve the community. I lived there for 15 years. And then one day, inexplicably, I knew it was time to come home. I wasn't sure I wanted to live in New Haven proper, but I knew that I needed to get back closer to the city I loved, to the city of my birth, the city of our ancestry. I had to get back to New Haven. You see, the nostalgia of the 5 generations of stories that my family had enjoyed there, those haunted me and called me back. The years that my children had enjoyed and thrived there, that spoke to me and called me back. The things I had enjoyed as an adult, the theaters, the Long Wharf and the Schubert and the parks, Edgerton and Edgewood, the gospel concerts in Gulf Street Park, the free lectures and the free concerts on the Green, they called me back. The diversity of the architecture that distinguished one neighborhood from another, that called me back. And the diversity of people, that called me back. Most of the things I had cherished in my youth were long gone, and if not gone, certainly significantly diminished. But the spirit of New Haven, the legacy of my ancestors and my ancestry, that's still there. It's still a community where the mayor and the baker and the candlestick maker all know my name and I know theirs. And so I tiptoed back. I took a look around looking for a place to settle. And I came upon a community where I knew I could savor my history in New Haven and that I could share the good times. I found a community of storytellers. Many of them weren't even old New Haveners, but they too had come to love and value all that New Haven had to offer. And they were there to welcome me home.
Thank you, Denise. That was beautiful. I loved the imagery of old New Haven
Yeah.
and how you saw it growing up. I'd like to bring the rest of our performers back in for a final bow. Thank you so much to Elisabeth and Wendy and Seth. You are very, very marvelous. And thank you so much to our audience for tuning in. The next Dinner Stories is June 20th. And the next story event is May 30th at 3 p.m. with Bridget Brown. She's doing a workshop called Storytelling for Change. It's for people who want to connect to a cause, but they can't understand the clear story. So it's going to teach you the power to change hearts and minds. I hope you'll join us. Thank you for Tiff for taking care of us in the studio tonight. And have a very good evening. Go to artidea.org to see everything we're doing. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.